Welcome to Season 1, Episode 10 of Digital Dissection, where we take a closer and possibly unnecessary look at our favorite properties. Today, we're talking about one of the most endearing sci fi series of our time, Star Trek. A franchise has produced 9 different TV series with a 10th in development and 13 movies over 55 years. So, naturally, you're going to have a few flops along with your successes. So, today we ask what makes one series great and others as bad as a Romulan ale hangover?
And before we start this 5-year mission, we'd like to thank you for continuing to support our homegrown operation. As always, we are Joe and Mark, two dudes who love discussing pop culture with you and hopefully bringing you perspectives you wouldn't have found without either a ton of reading or watching a lot of television. What we still need is your support to like, comment, subscribe, and review our show. We can now be found where you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can find us by searching for at Digital Dissect 1 or Digital Dissection, a nerd podcast. And if you're not following podcast websites, you can also find us on YouTube, as well as Facebook and Twitter, where we share more pop culture news. So feel free to join the conversation.
So today, I think we're probably covering kind of the biggest franchise we have so far. Like this is easily dwarfing the other ones. Again, like Star Trek has just been around well before we were born. I think
Yeah.
exactly like 20 years before we both hit the planet, Star Trek had debuted in 1966. So it's been around for a while.
Yeah, I remember my dad telling me about how, the the he actually used to remember Star Trek because of the Packers winning the first Super Bowl. And they, ironically kind of
Hmm.
happened right around the same time.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and but one of the interesting things I always thought about Star Trek was that I always felt like the fans of the show were a lot more intense than other properties that I came across when I was growing up.
Hmm.
Nowadays pop culture is so widely dispersed and
Oh
it's easy
yeah.
to consume, and
Hmm.
there's so much for everybody now, right? I mean, there's a whole lot of different audiences that pop culture touches nowadays.
Oh, you're completely right on that one. I mean, some of our first like conventions and everything happened because of Star Trek fans wanting to dress up and meet with other Star Trek people. I'm not going to say it was the first convention, but like when conventions really started getting big, like Star Trek had its hand in that. And like when you say the fans are an intense part of it, I'm definitely one of them. You have to look at like this is a series that was saved at least twice because of fans writing in or fans demanding that the show not be canceled, as well as looking at how like the fans took their love of the series and used that to influence other real world events that went on. So it was a cultural phenomenon that was really, really driven by the fan base. So I know I've been big on Star Trek since literally always that I can think of. I remember starting with the Next Generation because obviously that was the one that was around when we were actually alive. Um, and I
Mhm.
started with that because my brother really liked it. And so, like most things, that I'm the little brother, so if he likes something, there's a good chance I really like it because he likes it. But that's how it definitely started for me. But that's not the end all be all of how much I've just really fallen for Star Trek over the years and how much I got into it. So I remember watching through the Next Generation all the way till its end, and really remember like my family like recording the last episode as it aired on TV, which is, I don't know, probably illegal, but um going back and watching that a few times because of how much we just loved how it wrapped up the series and how it took the literal best of everything that we thought Star Trek stood for and uh, brought it into this last two-part episode. I know you'd mentioned like you'd watch a little bit with your dad. So is that where Star Trek started with you?
Yeah, I mean, Star Trek actually started at just about the same point, with my brothers and I watching it in the early 90s. and we watched The Next Generation. Now, I'll absolutely preface my Star Trek experience with it being, if we had to compare it to, let's say, like a college education.
Mm-hmm.
Joe's got his bachelor's and a master's degree. He's probably even got a minor somewhere in Star Trek. Whereas I only went for a 2-year degree and I didn't complete it. So I'm my credit
Mhm.
is not nearly as much with the Star Trek universe. But you're totally right though. My dad and I bonded over a little bit of Star Trek, the original series, because there was this point where I don't know if my dad was just kind of going through something and he
Mhm.
was, living through the glory days, but he went back and watched Johnny Quest at one point in time, and then he also started watching the original Star Trek series again. So me being a son interested in his parents' endeavors, I kind of sat there and watched some of it with him, and um, so yeah, that's how I got some of the season one and part of season two of the original series exposure. But yeah, it was Star Trek was one of those things that I always knew about.
Mhm.
Was always kind of aware of, what property was kind of going on at that point in time.
Mhm.
And I would say like the most recent movies are probably the things I actually have the most amount of screen time with, because they're all over the place. You can always watch them.
Oh
So,
yeah.
but either way, I've always appreciated Star Trek for what it was. So
Mhm.
no judgment from me on on those who love this property. So
Mhm. And that's the thing. Like when it comes to like the people who really love this property, they're so terribly divided in what they love about it in a lot of terms, or basically not what they love about it, but which part of the property they love. Because over the years you have, like, we've seen basically a new Trek comes out. It's almost like this weird phase where after the first series had come and gone, a new Trek would come out, and there's kind of like this initial hatred for it, and then there's this really big build and loving it, and then right as you really love it, the show's done, and then it kind of cycles and does that each time we get a new series. Because I think one thing that Star Trek really did well for me growing up is how much I got attached to the characters and what they were doing. So when those characters are no longer going to be a part of your life and Star Trek goes on, it's almost like most people aren't ready for that to happen. So we get upset about it. So what we want to look at today is kind of like what makes Star Trek great, what makes people latch onto the property so much so that they kind of almost, I don't want to say turn inward and have hatred for the property itself, but why it is that some properties really resonate with with some people over others.
yeah, I mean, one of the things I was interested in here was,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I hate to say this, but was hopefully, gaining some of your knowledge on Star Trek, mind meld style here. And
Mm-hmm.
we've been pretty good about digging into the historical context behind the properties that we've
Mm-hmm.
liked, and so for those of you that don't have any kind of Star Trek exposure whatsoever, it all started with a guy named Gene Roddenberry, who decided he wanted to create his own vision for the future. And yeah, I guess I'm curious to know what, I guess, to understand, Joe. I mean, what you know about Roddenberry and where he came from.
Yeah, well, like you said, Roddenberry is the start of this whole thing. And um I think it's because of what Roddenberry's vision of the future is. It's something that we all hopefully could aspire towards and really latch on to, that made it so great. And it was his basically really unrelenting devotion to what that vision is what made the first two series of the franchise what they were. Even though you find that Roddenberry's actual involvement with the two series does wane after a while. But before we get to that,
Yeah.
let's look at exactly what was around Roddenberry
Hmm.
at that time. Um, Gene Roddenberry, I believe he was a pilot at one point. I believe I think he was in World War II. I think he was a World War II veteran, or if not, still attached to it. But the world around him currently is the world is grasped in the Cold War. There's this constant fear of the two really big superpowers kind of annihilating each other through nuclear ability. Um, you have the Vietnam War that's going on. You have the race riots and the civil rights movements of the 60s that are, of course, humanity's fight to equality is boiling over. And you have campus protests everywhere. And Gene really saw the world almost as though we were coming apart at our seams and we were kind of going after each other. And he wanted to find a world where people could negotiate these problems no matter what they were. And that's
Yeah,
where
which is that's a pretty endearing aspect of all Star Trek is, you see how people often solve conflicts with their words and not just fighting. It's very unique to Star Trek.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's almost sadly one of the things that kind of in my opinion like actually turned people away from Star Trek is because it especially in like really the original series through the Next Generation and its spin-offs, there's a lot of emphasis on that philosophy and really other philosophies in general that are going on, and not so much emphasis placed on the action and adventure of going through space. So that's something that I think turns some people away, especially when they're younger. They're hoping for pew pew space lasers, which is not that's not something that's meant to like belittle any other sci-fi franchise, but I think that's what a lot of us are looking for when we look at science fiction. I mean, that's what Buck Rogers was way back when. It was action adventure just in space. Star Wars, it starts afterwards, which again, fantastic, beautiful property, but there is a lot of action and romance and a lot of these traditional things that we really grasp onto. And part of what made Star Wars great was that storytelling, was that action. And when that's not really there, it is harder for a lot of audiences to grasp onto. And that's not meant to like also like say that like Star Trek is supposed to be highbrow. It's certainly not highbrow. I mean, especially when you look at like production of these shows, Star Wars, even like the producers and the actors have always said Star Trek was a low budget show in both the original series and Next Generation. But let's get back to that really again, that idea of Roddenberry's philosophy of that. Basically, you have what he pitched the original network NBC with on the show was a wagon train into space, which also is weird because he was trying to appeal to the greater audience at the time in the 60s, which were people who enjoyed Westerns. So
that's once again, that's how my dad and I also bonded was watching all these Westerns. And just before we get too far away from it though, as you start talking about the philosophy of Star Trek and basically how the makeup of the crew and all that kind of stuff that we'll get into here, I do want to say that as a military brat, I do know that Gene Roddenberry flew something like 90 combat missions in World War II.
Oh, nice. Fantastic.
So like the philosophy and his approach to things, maybe that could have a pretty big impact on how they start to build this world out, if you get my drift. I mean,
completely. And actually, it's because of his experience in World War II and crafts that he was not necessarily, I don't think he was necessarily involved with, but he took from World War II and put them into Star Trek. So when you took that philosophy of being able to talk through problems, that's how he got the idea for Captain Pike on the USS Yorktown, going through space, solving problems by negotiation, which of course is not Star Trek as we know it. Because even by the time they hit the pilot, they had to change things. He got the name of the Yorktown from an aircraft carrier from World War II. That was
cool.
Yeah, it was part of his inspiration from it. What was that? And then ultimately, basically, as he's throwing names around, there's no real big magical reason for the change other than he just kind of saw more the historic significance of the name Enterprise and how it's been used on so many other ships in the world's history, that he just settled on Enterprise as opposed to Yorktown. And then you get the initial pilot, the cage, with Pike, Spock as the first mate, and then you have this issue of like the Enterprise being surrounded by these other beings, and of course through what the show is meant to do, they more or less negotiate their way out of it, and they come to a resolution as opposed to fighting their way out, going in guns a blazing.
Mhm.
And the network
Yeah.
liked the idea, wasn't fond of the captain, wasn't fond of Spock either. They thought that he, with his pointy ears and upwards eyebrows, was too satanic looking. Um, but Gene Roddenberry fought tooth and nail to keep Spock in, and there was an original agreement with NBC that as long as he's a background character, it's okay. Which
It-
completely changes as you see. Yeah.
and something I did, so I knew this was going to happen when we started talking about this,
Mhm.
that like stuff was just going to shake loose because I have run into some of this stuff
Mhm.
before. So sorry to lie to everybody just like 5 minutes ago,
It's just
but
you're a bigger Trek fan
something
than you realize. It's okay.
well, it's just coming back, man. We're opening up paths that haven't been there in a while. But
Hmm.
going to the origins of like the original series, though,
Hmm.
so he actually wrote a pilot called The Wild Blue,
Oh yeah. Hmm.
which went to pilot but it didn't get picked up, and this would be like he had names in this pilot that actually would reappear. So as you mentioned,
Hmm.
Pike, Philip Pike was one of them. Edward Jellicoe was another. Jellicoe would appear later.
In the next gen is a fun. Yep, good
Yep,
reference. Hmm.
yep, and next gen, and then James T. Irvine was the
Ah
other name.
yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, I thought that was cool that you mentioned the obviously the pilot here in the early days of the show, because I mean he was a writer pretty much ever since post his
Hmm.
post service days. So yeah, a lot of this stuff that he brought up in the original series had been on paper for a while. So it's kind of cool to see it all come to life in one way or another.
Yeah, yeah, it's great that basically he makes Star Trek almost like his, I don't want to say perfect amalgamation, but like what he really wanted out of his life and his vision by taking things from other aspects of his life and putting them into the series. Um, and speaking of that, like looking at like you said, like the crew themselves, like that obviously changes after the pilot. And we get James D. Kirk in there, played by William Shatner, which we can have more fun talking of Shatner as we go. But his crew was meant to really show what he thought humanity could be. The original Star Trek
Mhm.
was very, very much plot driven. So there weren't a lot of like individual crew arcs, like story arcs for individual characters. We mostly focused on
Yeah.
three that we'll get to here in a bit. But look at just the makeup of the crew. You did have James T. Kirk, who was a Canadian, as the head of everything. You had Leonard Nimoy as Spock, who was an alien and was meant to look alien, not satanic, just to remind you of the fact that yes, they are going through space at all
Yeah.
times. You've got an alien there with them, and then you had Nichelle Nichols as Lieutenant Ahura, who
Ooh.
this another like a huge first is that she is the first African American woman with a legitimately like good, like I don't want to say good role, but a legitimately larger role in a TV series ever. Before
Yeah.
her, they're basically extras or side characters.
This was a huge, yeah. I mean, and I mean, I think anybody who digs into this is gonna who
Hmm.
wasn't alive in the '60s, of course, but yeah, this was a huge step forward
Hmm.
for people of color in popular media, and so yeah, I always remember, even as a kid, being told that yeah, this was a major achievement, just in pop culture. So yeah, always awesome to hear that sci-fi helped kind of break down some of these barriers.
Yeah, it did, absolutely did. And then Nichols wasn't even the only one because you had George Takei, who was a
Mhm.
Japanese American born citizen who spent a good deal of his life actually in an internment camp um, before
Yeah.
and he did this as a child. And then he makes his way onto TV as the ship's helmsman. And um, I don't want to say this is necessarily like a backstep as far as like his real vision for the future, but I mean Gene Roddenberry knew that George Takei was gay on the set of this, and Takei had even asked Roddenberry if that was like something they could explore through the show, but um,
Mhm.
Roddenberry is actually a little overwhelmed by that, and he was more or less saying that, hey, I'd love to do that, but I've already got an African American woman who just kissed a white guy on TV, and I've got all these other basically storylines about equality and civil rights that if I do one more, who knows what'll happen to me. So it was kind of like Roddenberry wanting to acknowledge the fact that he did want to have um, something with gay rights in there, but was almost afraid that that would almost
Mhm.
be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that would definitely get the show canceled. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, so we've got George Takei in there, and then we have Scotty, obviously a Scotsman, who is
Mhm.
down in engineering but is still a big bridge crew member. McCoy is there, not terribly diverse. He's just kind of pessimistic but fun to go along with. My personal favorite of the series.
Oh, I was gonna
Um,
say, yeah, he was my favorite too,
mhm.
and DeForest Kelly is one of the greatest. You know, he's just one of the greatest TV personalities.
Oh yeah, and he has also like of the many phrases that do get like kind of like brought into popular culture because of the show. Damn it, Jim! I'm a doctor, not a literally anything you want to throw in there is one of my favorite things to do. Um, so
Yeah.
I mean, I'll do that at work with other things like, damn it, I'm a teacher, not a not an actual scientist. With coworkers when almost like they expect me to know science answers. It's like I know some, but not all. But other than that, you had Chekhov, who seems like it's not too big, but he was what kind of like Jewish Russian descent, and more or less shows like these were the people that we were kind of afraid of in the Cold War. People of like Eastern European descent and a part of like the Soviet Union, and here he is on the ship as an equal member of humanity going forward. And I remember hearing this way of Roddenberry describing the series, and it's breaking me that I can't remember exactly where it was from, but Roddenberry described that the Enterprise isn't a ship through space, it's actually the planet Earth, and its crew is all of us. And every time
Yeah.
they encounter an alien species with a problem, those are the problems that we're facing today. And this crew of the future shows us how we can use our knowledge and our humanity to solve the problem as opposed to making into a conflict. And
Mhm.
that's something that always stuck with me, because he really believed that if people of the Federation could basically negotiate peace with a potentially hostile alien race, we should be able to at least work with each other. And that it should kind of be the heart of Star Trek in general. And that's something that Roddenberry wanted to make sure was done throughout the original series, wanted to be done throughout the movies of the original series, and what he brought back to the next generation when he started with that show. Um, so
Yeah.
I would say like with the original series, were there any episodes that really stood out to you that you really enjoyed because of
Would love to give you like an educated answer, but really what I think
Mhm.
of the most from the original Star Trek series is Captain Pike in the in his like wheelchair apparatus thing, because
Oh
you know
yeah.
because
Hmm.
I found South Park before I found original Star Trek. So
Hmm.
as I was watching South Park and they would use that joke
Yep.
in an episode at one point, uh seeing that is one of the most iconic things from the original series. I mean, other than some
Hmm.
of the ridiculous action sequences and like
Oh God, yes.
it's just the cheesy choreography and
Oh.
yeah,
Hmm.
there's some fun stuff to go back and look
Oh
at there.
yeah, absolutely. That's
Um,
kind of the fun. And this is what you have producers from the next generation saying this too, that Star Trek has always been a low budget show. And that was kind of like the fun of the original series too. I mean, one of the first aliens you see is literally like I think like a poodle, like
yeah,
covered in
it
something else,
is.
and it is blatantly a dog. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. That is a dog literally wrapped in like faux fur with a fake like horn on its head.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Not to mention, like you said, the choreography of Kirk Fu. Um,
Yeah.
like I think my favorite like Kirk fighting move, which again also always weird that eventually one of the tropes of the show that's supposed to be about negotiation is Kirk breaking out into a fight, like physically with something.
Yeah.
And on top of it looking like William Shatner has never really thrown a punch in his life, whenever he chose to basically throw himself sideways at an enemy is usually what I kind of like. That okay, that I've suspended belief long enough. This isn't a real fight.
Well, there is one episode I do remember
Mm-hmm.
called the Galileo 7.
Mm-hmm.
And that was this was like the first episode that kind of laid the groundwork for, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
And I remember that the Enterprise is supposed to deliver like relief supplies to a colony,
Mm-hmm.
but 7 of the crew members end up crash landing on on a hostile planet, hostile environment.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, like Kirk has to basically make the decision between, who do I help? Like whose
Mm-hmm.
life is more important here. And so I do remember that one, just because of the fact that once again this show was kind of pitched as a pseudo space western to get it across
Mm-hmm.
the line. But the Galileo 7 just it always hung out to me or stuck out there to me because of the the eventual Khan storyline and everything.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm. And which goes on to be arguably probably leads to like the best movie of the franchise with Wrath of Khan. But the movies I think we'll save for a side stitch.
Yeah, we don't have enough time for that today,
No,
everybody.
no,
We're
we
sorry.
only have enough time for some of the TV, not even all of the TV, but some of the TV. One of the
Yeah,
things that
but
really,
yeah.
oh yeah, one of the I think one of
Go
my
ahead.
I think one of my favorite standout episodes, um, really to me is the I think it's the Corbelite maneuver. Yeah.
The here we go. Knocking stuff loose again. Yes,
Mhm.
carbamite. Yes, the
Yep.
carbamite maneuver. Yes.
Carbonite maneuver, where basically you have another alien race and the Enterprise are basically kind of at a stalemate. And the Enterprise is more or less on its last leg. Like one more shot and the ship is going down. How can we solve this problem? And um, Spock is suggesting surrender. We have all these other ideas from the crew. And then Kirk gets this idea that we've been playing chess this whole time when we should have been playing poker.
Mm-hmm.
And the crew is kind of lost on that. So Kirk has them hail the other ship and say that we have the hull is made with corbomite, and that the next shot that you deal us will reflect right back at you at I think it's like twice the strength, which would almost be guaranteed to like destroy the other ship.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other ship is put in this area. It's like, well, is he lying or is it the truth? And we're not sure what to do or how to take this. So Kirk was obviously bluffing the whole time. And it
Mm-hmm.
was very hard for members like Spock to like handle like that substance isn't real. We can't handle this. But it was kind of a way that showed that they could talk their way out of something and could come to like a peaceful negotiation, even though fighting had already initiated. So, and
Yeah.
again, that line from Kirk, the we've been playing chess and we should have been playing poker, I think is like a standout favorite for a lot from the original series.
Well, it also helps kind of paint, Bill Shatner's character in
Mm-hmm.
a way that I hate to use sports and try to cross him into this because it doesn't work for everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
like he's like the Wes Welker of like ship captains, right? Like
Yeah.
he's extremely scrappy.
Mm-hmm.
He comes up with ways to win. The Kobayashi Maru, there's no like people always say there are some scenarios that you just can't win, but he's like, nope, I can
Yep.
win in every scenario. You just
Mm-hmm.
give me the layout and I'll figure a way to make it work. And so, from the original series standpoint, that was one of the things that I always took as a just as a really good takeaway from the original series is that, there, if you just put your mind to it,
Mm-hmm.
you can think your way through most issues. And also just to never lose that curiosity of being intertwined with science. And there's this unfortunate thing that happens to a lot of people that as a kid you're constantly asking questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're always asking, how does that work? Why does this happen? Why does that behave the way it does? And somewhere in between, folks just kind of gravitate away from continuing to ask those questions.
Yeah,
And
we
so
really do.
Yeah, this original series kind of because I started watching it as like an early teen,
Hmm.
early young teenager, and so for me, and this is just sci-fi in general, not just Star Trek, but like the show really helped do this,
Hmm.
was keep asking questions, keep being curious about things,
Hmm.
and so from that standpoint, Star Trek is always going to be great for that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but before the original series, you just didn't get this kind of stuff,
No, you didn't. And this was like one of the things that actually in a column that Roddenberry wrote right before the premiere that went out so people could read something more about the series coming up. He started with science fiction. Absolutely not. Rather, a real adventure in tomorrow's space. And he said this was based off of the best scientific knowledge and estimates of what our astronauts may face in the future. So he really wanted the science to be there um,
Yeah.
in this series. That was really, really key to him. Although, honestly, in the original series, the science was kind of pokey. We've got warp drive. They never explain how it works. There's a dilithium crystal that is kind of always breaking. And if you push the engine further, the ship's going to blow up.
Hey, that's
that's
all we need to know.
that's all we need to
That's
know is we're giving it all she's got, Captain, sort of thing. Um,
that's all
but
we
yeah,
needed to know. There was
yeah,
nothing
all you
else
need
we
to
had to
know.
know.
But yeah, no, the first series had this really bold interventionist concept, even though um like we thought Roddenberry wanted us to be able to negotiate everything. The Enterprise did really kind of like slip itself into a lot of situations and decide, hey, we're going to break this up. We're going to take care of this. We're going to show you how it's done with our great wisdom, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And a lot of episodes really end up focusing around Kirk, Spock, and McCoy because those are kind of like the main three of there. And it worked really well for the first season, not so much for the second season. The show was actually canceled after its second season. Um, and NBC's like, we don't want to pick it up. It's just the ratings are lower. We think we're gonna go another direction. And this is where the fans actually wrote in and saved the series and kept it going for one more season. And
Yeah.
kept things moving. Um, but then when we got to the third season, they agreed to bring it back, but Roddenberry starts to basically almost take a little bit of a back seat, and he's more he doesn't write as much, but
Hmm.
you see him just kind of there as an advisor to make sure his overall vision's still kind of intact. And one of the reasons why he stepped back is because he pretty much knew this season wasn't going to make the show wasn't going to make it after the season. They had
Yeah.
moved Star Trek from its Monday night slot to Friday night at 10 p.m. No one's
Oof.
watching TV at Friday night at 10 p.m.
That's a
Everyone
kiss.
who's
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a
they're
kiss
all
of
out
death.
partying.
Even now, like if you get
Mhm.
moved to Friday nights, you're usually a TV show that doesn't have a whole lot of time left.
Yeah, the axe is coming down when that happens. When you get moved to Friday, really Friday or Saturday. That's those 2 days where people are usually expected to be like, we're out and about, we're doing things. No one's watching TV, or
Hmm.
not enough people are watching TV. If your show gets moved there, you're probably on your last leg.
I'm
Um,
Thursday or I'm nothing.
yes, Thursday, maybe Tuesday, but live for Thursday.
Yeah, but on Tuesday nights you got to worry about Shia LaBeouf.
You do have
That's
to
the
worry about
only
Shia
issue.
LaBeouf. He's
For
out there hunting, and you should not be in the woods alone on a Tuesday night.
for the, for the for those we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but for those of you that don't know what the hell we're talking about, there's a really funny musical called Shia LaBeouf the Musical by Rob Cantor that's just absolutely hilarious.
Mhm.
Not a sponsor,
Not a
but
sponsor. Rob Cantor's not a sponsor of this podcast.
well,
Um,
we'll tell you what, we've got a show that's been canceled,
mhm.
twice.
Yes.
Um, one of the things about Star Trek that you can find in pretty much most of the what's
Mhm.
called the non-modern series was the idea of being episodic so that
Mhm.
no matter where you jumped in on this crazy journey, you could typically find something in that episode where you don't have to necessarily worry about an overarching larger narrative or anything.
Mhm.
You just pop right in. It's very similar to the spaghetti western style of storytelling,
Absolutely. Mhm.
and so I think for people who like the original show, I think it might have worked for and against them, you
I
know.
agree. Yeah.
um
Because I mean, it made it hard to attach to anyone outside of those main three. Because again, that first show was very much plot driven.
yeah.
So it was move the story along in each episode, and it didn't matter where you jumped in as long as you could appreciate the episode for what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that the Next Generation, which is our next trip in this
Yeah.
series, also did extremely well. Um, Now, Joe, I know I told you once
Hmm.
again that I didn't know a whole lot about Star Trek. Um, this is the one. This is the series that I absolutely spent most of my time with. And one of the things about the Next Generation that I thought was really cool was that we talked about how Roddenberry had
Hmm.
characters he just kind of had waiting to use,
Hmm.
names that he had used for years. The same thing kind of happened out of the post original series, movie journey that they went on.
Yes.
Um, so he ended up making three characters who were supposed to appear in the original series movies that they originally created so that they could put them into the films without having to spend a ton of money,
Hmm.
thinking, hey, if we can't get the original crew back or pay their ridiculous salaries, because they got all these actors got
Oh
popular,
yeah. Hmm.
Um, so they created these three characters who would actually go on to mirror or become characters who would be on the next generation. So I believe it was William Riker.
Hmm.
Um, oh, I knew I was going to forget the other two. Damn it. Counselor Troy,
Hmm.
and then there's one other one. Damn it. It'll come to me once again. 3 a.m. thoughts. But the
Can we
long
go with
story short,
Worf?
though,
Will Worf be the one? Probably not
it,
Worf.
it might have been Worf. For some reason, I'm
Hmm.
leaning towards like Geordi, though. I think it was
It's
Geordi
probably
the
more
Forge.
Geordie. Yeah.
Yeah, but either way, that's one of the things I remembered was that
Hmm.
Roddenberry was kind of thinking, all right, I got these three characters that I just haven't used yet. How can
Hmm.
I repurpose them? And so that's what ended up being the foundations for those three characters.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And even funny thing with Worf is that Michael Dorn, who plays Worf, appears as a Klingon named Worf, and I think Star Trek 4, um, like the Star Trek the movie 4, and then
mhm.
shows up in the Next Generation, also as a Klingon named Worf, and they are not the same character.
I mean, I'm fine with
I'm fine with that, but it's just
that.
funny. Like, oh, that's Worf. That's Worf. It sounds like the same guy. It is the same guy, not the same Klingon. Um, but yeah, and
Yeah,
actually, like the start of the Next Generation, when that was announced, it was kind of weird because it was right around the 20th anniversary of the film.
yeah.
Star Trek 4 was just about to be released, and Roddenberry was actually looking forward to retiring. And then he finds out Paramount wants to start a new series that's after. Um, Kirk and the crew shenanigans. And he kind of, because of his love for the property and the vision that he wants, he refuses to let go and
Yeah.
more or less ends up being through not so peaceful negotiations being brought back into like having creative control of it because after Star Trek the Motion Picture completely flopped. And if you watch that movie, it has a small dedicated fan base that says that that movie's good. I am not in that fan base. That movie was really boring and horrible, in my opinion. But after that movie, they're like Roddenberry, like you can make sure that like basically we're staying in line with your vision, but other people are writing this from now on. Like your other creative staff are coming in. So Roddenberry wants to make sure this TV series doesn't go that same route. He wants more control of it. And initially he does get it. Um, so what happens then is he takes his idea of this more peaceful humanity and he like cranks that dial up to 11 with the Next Generation. So from Kirk's time, suddenly there's no more money because in the original series, Kirk does mention, I think, in one episode of these miners on another planet who are mining gold, that they're all going to be rich men, and these are all people who live on Earth. Money is no longer a thing.
Yeah.
Um, he wants people to um, live in what a movement called humanism, which actually Isaac Asimov wrote to Roddenberry and gave him a copy of his book on humanism, and that really inspired Roddenberry to take his vision to the next step of having no more money in there. And also, one thing that drove the original writers of the Next Generation crazy was that there was no more conflict among the crew itself.
Well, it's odd that you would say that the crew doesn't have a lot of conflict amongst them
Mm-hmm.
because Roddenberry absolutely had conflict amongst
Massive conflict with
everyone else on the show.
Roddenberry.
I mean
He
that.
and his lawyer, who was meddling constantly through that show, massive amounts of conflict.
Well, they fired. I think he fired like 30 writers in the first season alone.
Yes, and
Um,
there's actually also a joke that I think in one of the bathrooms near the set of the Next Generation. They actually wrote the name of every writer who had been fired from the Next Generation. And I think
Yeah.
it was close to like 45, 50 writers at the end of season two. So it was a lot of people got fired for writing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a writer that Roddenberry brought in, who literally showed up for one day,
Mm-hmm.
wrote one episode. Roddenberry reads it and fires him
Yeah. And it
on the spot.
also, that story is sadly hilarious too, because that writer was a really big fan of the show, of the original Star Trek, and he was super excited to work on it. And he turns in his
Yeah.
script, and Roddenberry comes the next day and basically says that he's sorry, that they have to part ways so soon, and that the show couldn't move forward with the both of them. And the writer thought Roddenberry was retiring. So
Yeah.
he was like, "Oh no, this sucks. Gene's going away." I think he leaves for lunch, comes back, and all of his furniture is moved out of his office, and that's how he figured out that he was fired.
I honestly, it's amazing that that first
Hmm.
season ever even was able to survive. And
Oh, the first three seasons, really.
well, but the whole reason why that first season survived was because of syndication.
Yeah, I mean that's it was also unique in the fact that like compared to the original show, like it wasn't a network TV show; it was syndicated from the start. So it was just pitched to like network after network, and they just picked it up if they wanted it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, that's pretty much how it kept going
Hmm.
because I mean, if you read some of the reviews on season one
Hmm.
of Next Gen, there are people that talk about how it felt kind of hard to get through.
Yep.
Um, I didn't so much look at it through that lens. I actually
Hmm.
really enjoyed season one of the Next Generation.
Hmm.
I mean, we we talked about the naked now. Uh,
Oh yes, in the robot sex episode.
yeah, yeah, we talked about people.
Hmm.
Yeah, we talked about Tasha Yar banging Data, who's fully functional, as we would find out.
Hmm.
Um, which honestly, that episode, even though we joked about it and poked fun,
Hmm.
uh, I mean, they do actually call back to the original series
They
in that
do, yeah.
episode.
Hmm.
They specifically reference the original crew and what they dealt with and how they overcame a very similar situation. So I always thought that was kind of cool that they took the time to
Yeah.
at least explore some of those previous
Hmm.
storylines. But
Yeah. Yeah, and
um,
that was big in part thanks to like again Roddenberry making sure that he really had his creative control over the Next Generation for the first few years or the first few seasons. Um, and when we look then at like really comparing the things that make the Next Gen great, so or make Star Trek great. One thing we'd mentioned that made the original series great was like the diverse cast of characters who would come together to solve problems. When we look at the cast of the main, basically the main crew, um, it's kind of diverse. It's kind of not like your classic 90s show where you do have like very like what almost feels like forced representation. Like not in that like I don't want to say forced representation, meaning it comes off cheesy more than helpful in a lot of 90s things, like Captain Planet, the original Power Rangers. Um, like they were cheesy, they meant well, but they were cheesy
yeah, but
in
you
what
can
they
say
did.
that you can say they created token characters. I
Oh,
mean,
they
that's
did.
fine. You can
Hmm.
say that.
They did.
We're beyond the point where we have to be careful about the '90s being low key racist with almost
Yeah.
everything we did.
Hmm.
I mean, it's the truth,
It is. Hmm.
and as you talk about the cast of the Next Generation, what they did a good job of was obviously having, they had representation within the cast, but
Hmm.
they did a really good job of showing how, the Enterprise, even though it's a ship, there's thousands of people on it,
Yeah.
and they do a good job with, at least in the first few seasons, of
Hmm.
kind of spreading the love around. You meet a lot of different characters, you see a lot of different people mixed in amongst the main cast.
Hmm.
um, so you have a chance to understand that the Enterprise even is a living, breathing organism all on its own.
Yeah,
So I thought that
absolutely.
was, yeah, something
Hmm.
great they did with that.
Oh, completely. And that's like they really hammer that through in the first episode where you've got Riker trying to find Data and he just gets transferred to the ship and he meets a crewman who laughingly says, "Oh, this must be your first time in a Galaxy class vessel." As he's walking around trying to find someone, because we look at the original crew of the Enterprise, and the whole crew I think was like 170 people, it was basically meant this is just to run the ship, and these are the people we need to just run the ship. And then we get to this Galaxy class Enterprise D, and there are, I think, 400 or 500 people on that ship. Most of them are citizens. Like they're literally there, just kind of like the Enterprise is a tour bus going through space. So again, it really drives home that whole like this is the planet Earth, and the crew is us. It is humanity. So we not only get interactions with the crew running the ship, but we get interactions with just people who are on the ship who don't necessarily have a role, um, going around and doing things. But looking at the main bridge cast is where it really does shine, because much like Star Trek, actually the original series it does backwards in the next gen. It starts very plot driven, and again, like the writers are driven crazy by this because like Gene explicitly said no one will fight amongst themselves on the crew in the first one, in like the first like 2 seasons. Um, and then
Except
that
it's not.
changes in it just didn't work. It did not work at all.
Well, specifically, I'm thinking of the episode Datalore, where
Oh yeah.
we or Datalore rather, where we find out about Data's quote unquote brother that they found on the same planet that they found Data on, and that's just all about internal conflict and
Oh,
and
completely.
and that's where a lot of people who have seen Star Trek memes is where Picard says, "Shut up, Wesley,"
Conflict right there with Wesley just being on the bridge.
yeah,
Right there.
Well, and so obviously we've kind of glossed over Patrick Stewart, being the heart of this series.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but
So
he treats Wesley like a whipping post. It is so odd though, right? Like
oh, it
it is
is.
so weird because he's so compassionate and he's so understanding. I mean, he treats Data like a real person. He even kind of imposes that on other people too. Like, hey,
Yeah.
you're not human in the sense that we call each other humans, but that doesn't make you any less of one. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's so weird that he's just beating
Yeah.
on Wesley every time he gets a chance. But
Which is
yeah,
also weird considering I mean, the active joke is that he is trying to sleep with Beverly Crusher throughout most of the series. Like they have this weird,
Mhm.
like they definitely have like sexual tension amongst each other. And he's at first just a complete dick to Wesley. Just doesn't, it's like,
Well,
nope, get this fucking kid off my bridge.
which further makes no
Mhm,
sense because you come to find out that decisions of Picard in the past actually
mhm,
led to the death of the what's this, I can't remember the Crusher's the
mhm.
dad's name, but he's the reason why she's a widow, and
Yeah.
that Wesley's dad is not around is because you find out there's, I'm not going to blow it for anybody, but
Hmm.
Picard's responsible for the death of the Crusher household.
Yes, it is his
And
fault.
yeah, and so it's just
His
odd that
time on the
like
Stargazer. Yeah.
yeah, it's just odd that he's coming after the widow and now he's like totally bashing the son all the time. I don't
Hmm.
want to sidetrack this too much, but that's sidetrack this. But that's that's
Side tracked, sir, is what you meant to say, not
yeah.
tracked.
Yeah, this is one thing that I just could not get over watching the original or the Next Generation. Was like, man, Picard's a
Hmm.
dick.
A little bit, yeah. Hmm.
At least early on.
So
Yeah.
yeah, which is also great because like you see like the compassion he has for literally every other crew member on that ship, and
Yeah.
especially Data. And one of my favorite episodes is Measure of a Man, where Data is basically being deemed property by the Federation, and he's gonna be brought back for further study. And Picard fights tooth and nail that Data is more than just a machine, and he's a vital member of the crew. And they go out to prove basically these 3 laws of robotics, not the ones that Asimov has, but basically
Yeah.
the 3 laws of what would make you sentient. And I think Data met like two, like pretty much right away. And there was the argument over the third for the most part. Um, and again, like the fact that he will fight so hard for the humanity of that character. And what is great is that as the show goes on, and unfortunately, due to like Roddenberry's health issues, is when he basically releases control to Rick Berman for the show.
Mhm.
And this is where the show really starts to open up more and really finds its rhythm, because this is when they say, nope, we're going to have story arcs where this is a Picard episode, this is a Troy episode, this is a Worf episode, this is a Geordi episode, this is
Yeah.
Data's 2 episodes. And this is where we now take something that makes Star Trek great, which was just that envisionment of the future, and we add something more to it. And that is, you can really get to see the individual lives of the crew so that you're not just focused on one or two members of it. And this is one of the things that really made me love Star Trek growing up, is that you saw, like, not only does the crew look diverse, but you get so much more of their personalities and their struggles. And that makes it more believable. This is humanity in space working through things. So that is something that I really loved growing up, is like you get a Data episode who's constantly like trying to figure out what it means to be human. You get Worf, who's split between two worlds of trying to be a traditional Klingon and having honor and doing all the things that Klingons want to do, but also being a Federation officer and the pride that he has in that. So he's torn between the two things.
Yeah, and he's got a hell of a sneeze too.
Hell of a sneeze. It's probably two sneezes. He has two spines, and he is twice as fully functional as anyone else on that crewmate, which is also a meme that runs rampant through the internet.
Yeah, people love the dual organs, which we will get a ton into. So I'll actually get us back. No. I'll remove my own bullshit there and get us back on track. But you're talking about Data though, and the idea of humanity. I mean, the show itself got very cerebral after a point.
Yeah.
And one of the examples of that I kind of earmarked, and I mean, I earmarked it long before we even put it as a topic, was, season 6 really did a lot of good with storytelling. And in particular, I'm going to dive right into a very specific episode. If you remember the chain of command.
Oh yes.
I mean, that episode was really fun because of the fact that they kind of just pull Picard from his post, on the Enterprise, and they replace him with Captain Jellicoe. Once again, that name was going to come back. But the episode gets into this this political intrigue and war games and then prisoners of war and torture and things like that. And so this episode was so well done that I don't want to give it away, even though, I mean, spoiler alert, right? We usually always say that, but here I don't want to give it away.
No, it's too good.
I just want to point out that the themes of that episode, would have been fine, would have been great for even a full-length feature film to explore. But they do it extremely well, and it's a two-part episode. Two-parters are kind of common in the Star Trek universe.
Oh yes, especially when you go to the Mirror Universe and it's just everyone wearing goatees.
Yeah, which is why I shaved my facial hair off, because I just couldn't. I hate feeling evil all the time. But to stay with season 6 though, going back to the idea of what is really humanity, was the ship in a bottle episode, where on the holodeck you find out that there is this computer program of James Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes, and he becomes self-aware, and then there's this discussion about, well, what really is this program? Like what does this mean for humanity if this program can go beyond the confines of being code, and these are questions that are being asked in the early 90s.
Yeah. And again, it's also great because it really does explore, like, with our ability to create new technology, what responsibility do we have for what that technology is capable of?
Yeah.
And that's what it explores there, and it explores that with Data. And I'd also like to point out that when Roddenberry did say that the original series was supposed to be scientific and best knowledge, and it was kind of just goofy, the Next Generation is where, like, it actually did that very well. They went into explaining the science behind phasers and the shields and the deflectors. And while Roddenberry did kind of have his own answers to those things, they actually told you how it worked. And this is also where you get the idea of how warp actually works, and how this is fun because of all, like, the fashion like space travel. Star Trek's warp fields are actually the most plausible out of any of them. And it's basically that fun line from the Abrams movie where Scotty says, "I never thought to think of it as space as the thing that's moving."
Yeah.
And that's basically how it's supposed to be working, is you get this warp field around the ship, and then you are taking matter and antimatter, and eventually I think they have a negative matter together, which negative matter is something that we have no, that's where the whole thing falls apart, is with negative matter. But basically they start just building up and amassing on an area that it literally starts warping space around the field of the warp field, and it kind of compresses it in front of the ship and makes it expand behind the ship. So it works like a wave pushing a surfboard. And again, it's space is what's moving. And because we can observe space moving faster than light, it's a work away around relativity. It says nothing can go faster than the speed of light except space itself, which is, as we know, is capable of actually, space-time can bend. We have seen it, the edges of the universe are moving faster than the speed of light. So we know that space can move faster than the speed of light. So this is one of the first times where they really made an attempt to explain the science behind how the ships work. And something that other properties sometimes intentionally just don't bother trying to do. They just say, nope, it's faster than light travel. So that's just how it works. And they like, basically, faster than light travel is just a plot point for the series. But Star Trek did its best to explain how it actually worked, which is really, really cool. Another thing that I really liked in it. So again, like things that made this series great. Again, you had that same science. We had the science focus is new, but that same diversity, solving problems. You had that the crew actually being a really big part of it, and that was really big. So those are all things that really drew me in. And with the season 6 thing with Jellicoe, I actually know that this was a personal favorite episode for Deanna Troi, played by Marina Sirtis, because this is where she finally got to stop wearing the velvet skin tight suits, because Jellicoe said, you have to wear a crew uniform, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then from that episode forward, she's always in the crew uniform even after Picard comes back.
Yeah.
So Marina Sirtis was actually very happy with that. And another thing with Deanna Troi, I thought what worked really great is the fact of, you had a counselor as a key member of the ship. So it really showed like how much mental health was really like encouraged in the 24th century, and having that taken care of. And also her struggles with her traditional race's view of how women should behave and how she didn't want to do that anymore, was also just a really great, like another dimension that the show added.
Which is funny you'd mention that too, because pretty early on in the series too, we visit a planet where they've essentially swapped gender roles, like traditional gender roles, and I thought that was a really interesting choice. That early in the series where you just see how you basically see how this whole society lives and operates. But once again, kind of hard hitting from a plot standpoint is that you come to find out that they realize that you can't stop the flow of humanity kind of going certain ways, which is a larger theme that I think kind of calls back to how Roddenberry wanted to, talk about gay rights in the original series. In this episode, even though it's a female run society with men kind of being subservient, whatever, I thought it was really important for them to point out that you can't stop, the behaviors of humans, because it doesn't just talk about the process between men and women. It just talks about how there are things that humanity is going to do and you can't prevent it from happening. And it goes right into that whole acceptance conversation. And so I thought that was, once again, early 90s. They're hitting some pretty high marks here.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And when you look at the overall success of The Next Generation, initially there was a lot of blowback from the fans. They did not want to see Kirk, Spock, and McCoy replaced by new people. So there was a lot of initial hatred for it. And to my knowledge, this show was only ever canceled once, and that was at the end of its 7th season. And that was more or less, I think the writers kind of just felt like the show had run its course, and it was time to end it there. Kind of like how Seinfeld went out on a high note. Like Jerry's like, nope, I think we're just done after 9, sort of thing. And I think to this day still has the highest average ratings of any Star Trek shows in The Next Generation. Even its 2 spin-offs with DS9 and Voyager, which is basically Star Trek's attempt at having a bar in space and doing Lost in Space, respectively. both fun series in their own right for the fans who like them. I'm just a bigger next gen person. Um, uh, I mean, shout out to Sailor. I loved Janeway's attempts at diplomacy sometimes though, which is more or
Mhm.
less depending on her levels of coffee she had in her system and how happy she was based off of it. It was
Yeah.
pretty great. Um,
And those are ones that I didn't spend
mhm.
really any time with. And when Joe and I were first talking about this idea, I went, wasn't Deep Space Nine just like Cheers but set in space? You
I
know,
mean,
there.
a lot of the episodes of the good episodes were basically Quark into shenanigans. It was more and Odo kind of like Quark, how dare you, sort of do this, and then you did have Colin Meanley, O'Brien, Chief O'Brien, who
Yeah.
started on the next gen, but then transitioned on to DS9, which Michael Dorn would eventually do it too. But you had his character becomes friends with basically an enhanced human doctor, Bashir, who have like this like very big bromance on the show, and they're constantly hanging out as much as possible. And it's kind of funny that those two actors, like in real life, did not like each other. They didn't get along.
Oof.
Um, what was a thing? Not quite as bad as like the original series, where like basically Shatner was very full of himself, and even though he did make lifelong friends with Leonard Nimoy, a lot of the crew not big fans of him. It's actually why I think George Takei was on his own ship in the later movies because he just could not stand being around Shatner for too long. And James Doohan, who played Scotty, was famously quoted for saying that he was a big fan of James T. Kirk, not so much Bill.
and and the thing is that it's such a it's such well-known history about Star Trek, if you're attached to it. But if
Mhm.
you're just coming into it for the first time, uh he obviously had quite a few issues, because at one point Shatner thought that um that his problem solving ability was being trumped by Leonard Nimoy's character
Mhm.
Spock. You know that Spock
Yeah.
was way too smart, and that
Mhm.
he felt that that Kirk should have gotten more problem solving capabilities. And like,
Mhm.
and this would continue. Like, not to throw Shatner in the bus because he's already
No.
under there, but he after the events of the movie Generations, where
Mhm.
through some interesting storytelling, we actually bridged the gap of that 80 years between the original
Mhm.
series and Next Generation. He hated the outcome of that so much, um, that he would end up writing his own book
Mhm.
series, called the Shatnerverse,
Yeah.
where his character doesn't die. And
Mhm. And if you get them on audiobook, Bill Shatner himself is the one doing the audiobook. So you can really immerse yourself into the Shatnerverse if you audible those. Also,
yeah.
Audible not a sponsor of this podcast.
Yeah. Well, not
um
not yet. We always
Not
say
yet.
yet.
We'll get there. We'll get
Yeah,
there.
hopefully.
And if you want like a fun take on all that the Shatner things, watch Galaxy Quest. Um,
Oh,
Amazing movie.
yeah.
Very well
Yeah,
casted.
yeah,
Not so much a spoof of Star Trek, so much as a spoof of behind the scenes Star Trek.
yeah,
And does a wonderful job of doing it. But that could be another episode, is just Galaxy Quest in itself. Um, so, and I hate to do this, to skip forward more, because we've gone on for a while here. What makes the first two series great,
yeah,
and there are a lot of great things of DS9, a lot of great things of Voyager, and even like the shortest series so far, Enterprise, which I really liked, but I also get why people didn't. A lot of good things that happened there, but we're going to kind of lump them into the next generation. What made those shows great, because a lot of things that next gen did really well was carried on to those shows too, where we got it's still they're still fairly episodic, but you will get these character arcs that stretch through, so you can really focus on the crew and how humanity is negotiating itself through the 24th century. And then Enterprise, I think it was, I think 20 years before the Enterprise went out, before Kirk's Enterprise went out. I'm loose
mhm,
on that, the time frame exactly when it goes out, but 10 years before the Enterprise went out, where Kirk joined it, is where the most recent modern series of Star Trek, Discovery, takes place, or at least where it starts. And this is again where we see that divide, where we have fans saying that no, my old Trek was better, this new Trek is junk, and we don't like it.
Yeah,
And
why do people hate this? Because once again, I this is kind of where I'll have to jump off the train because
mhm,
I have not spent any time with quote unquote new Trek here, but I
mhm,
have heard a lot of fans do not like it.
yeah.
So what's
Mhm.
the basis for that?
Yeah, and granted, like I was not around. Like again, I was born, I think, a year before Next Gen premiered, so I don't remember. Obviously, don't remember the hate for the Next Generation. We came along when Next Generation was well loved and well received, so it was interesting to really see the hatred for this one as a new Star Trek coming out. And of course, I mean there were squabbles with DS9, Enterprise, and Voyager as well, but this was really bad. Like it was a huge divide of people either really liking Discovery or really hating Discovery. And I remember being on the fence when this first started out. I'm now off the fence, but I was on it for a while there. And things that this did first, it was the first series where basically the central focus wasn't on the captain of the ship. While the original series, it was obviously centered around Kirk, and then Spock and McCoy were there. The Next Generation, Picard was definitely the heart of the show, but the show spent so much time with the rest of the rest of the cast. But Picard's still at the center, and the same thing with um, DS9 with Cisco, Voyager with Janeway, and Enterprise with Archer. But now we have Michael Burnham, who's actually basically the first mate. She's the Riker of the show without actually being Riker. She doesn't sleep around with everything like Riker did, which is probably for the best. Um, so
Who
it's
has the
great that
time? Who
yeah,
has the time?
who has the time? No one does. It's a big galaxy. You can't do that. So we have a focus on Michael Burnham, and that's really where I think the show, a lot of people are hurt by it, is that there is so much focus on Michael Burnham, and that it almost feels, for the most part, that the rest of the cast is useless. And that was kind of where that's also like the answer I arrived at. I stuck with it for the first 3 seasons,
Mhm.
and I just canceled CBS All Access before it turned to Paramount Plus. I was like, after the third season, I'm like, it looks like it's getting better, but I'm kind of done with it. So basically, you have like kind of a central cast that it tries to focus on, with Burnham, then Saru, who's a Keltian, who admittedly from the previews I thought was going to be really stupid, because it was his whole species was made to sense the presence of death. I'm like, how do you sense death is coming? Like, this is a lame spider sense. Like, what's going on with that? But whatever. Saru actually turns out his species was oppressed by another species, and he actually gets a really fun story arc in the second season. But it's Saru. Then you have Tilly, um, and Paul Stamets are basically the focus. There are other characters on the bridge. I can't tell you their names because honestly, there's not a lot of time spent on them in those first 3 seasons. So like they're not memorable, and that's what sucks, is because there could be fun things about them, but going from episode to episode, what you usually take away, Paul Stamets, who is also, I think, one of the first openly gay Star Trek characters on a series, who is the head engineer. Total douchebag the first 2 seasons, and I hate him. Hated him. I just was completely turned off by his character those first 2 seasons, because he was so cold and unforgiving and basically placed everyone beneath him.
Isn't he the
Um,
same guy that played the douchebag from Road Trip that tries to steal the main character's girlfriend away?
maybe
That's the same guy.
I think it
That's the
might
exact same
be.
guy.
Yeah,
Maybe he's being typecast. You know,
it
maybe
could be. Mm-hmm.
seriously, I'm gonna have to look at
Yep.
that.
A
I'm
little
pretty
bit.
sure it's the
He
same
might
actor. It's got
be.
to be.
Yeah, look that up. And the character does loosen, like he does lighten up a bit in the third season. Um, you have Tilly, who's very scattered but trying to move her career forward. And for every like step forward, I think those characters take, I feel like Burnham puts them a step back, because again, they will be this major story problem, and ultimately Burnham solves the problem, or ultimately she is the one who, like, the thing needs to focus on. So what happened at the end of the first season, so what happened at the end of the second season, and even at the start of the third season, when I thought, hey, here's a chance where something could change, because Burnham is separated from the rest of the crew, and they're stuck on this planet with this parasitic ice, which whatever, is basically trying to swallow the ship, and the crew has to like negotiate and do a few things before they can get off the planet. Um, they finally do that. It looks like they're gonna get out of there the nick of time, and the ship is like struggling to come off of the planet. And you're fighting like, oh my god, are they gonna do it? Are they gonna get stuck there? And suddenly this other ship comes in. You're like, hey, maybe their new friends who they saved through like their reasoning are gonna help them out. And the ship comes in, puts a tractor beam, pulls Discovery out. Nope, it was Michael Burnham had found them out of nowhere. Found them, tracked them down, and she saved them. So even again, like it just sucked because she robs them of character. Her writing robs them of character development, and it just blows, in my opinion.
That's a shame, because when you look at the next generation, just as an
Mhm.
example, I mean, you've got different members of that crew stepping up and
Mhm.
solving problems that save everybody else's ass.
Yep.
I mean, hell, even Wesley Crusher does it multiple
Yeah.
times.
Mhm.
And then you see other characters from that bridge step in. Like there's an episode where, Picard falls ill,
Mhm.
and then just due to the other folks on the ground mission, like LaForge has to step up and be
Mhm.
the captain of the Enterprise. Like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is cool because it does give a character something else to do other than just
Mhm.
one responsibility.
Exactly. And then I mean, Discovery fans could argue like there are times where like Discovery is, I mean, Burnham's not the captain of the ship, so therefore, like she's not always the captain. Other people are doing things, but the problem is she is constantly the one stepping up. She is always the one solving the problem, and that's what kind of stinks. So it doesn't even
Hmm.
matter that she's not the captain. Or I mean, story. I guess spoiler alert: if you're Discovery, if you're just starting Discovery, at the end of the third season, she becomes the captain of the ship, which
Well,
she
I mean,
might
if
as well
you're
have been the whole time anyway.
well, if you're
Um,
saving the day every day, I would
yeah,
think
might as
you'd,
well get paid for the job you've been doing.
yeah, you should
Um,
earn that promotion by that point.
exactly. And when we look at the other things, like so we said, like right there, that's where it kind of falls short and what made the next generation great and the next generation like spin-offs. And another part where I think that really it falls short has to do with the way they approach solving problems. Like we said, like the past two series, there's always like a negotiation between our Enterprise crew and the aliens they're dealing with. And it was never the Enterprise's crew taking the high ground for the sake of taking the high ground. It was never, we're right, you're wrong, and we're going to show you why you're wrong. It was always, we think we're right, you think we're right. How can we work this out? In
Mhm.
Discovery, the crew of the Discovery is always right, and everyone else is always wrong. And they will tell you that to your face and be unapologetic about it. They just don't care. You see them actually do this in the second season when Christopher Pike comes on and the Enterprise shows up for a small bit of it. And there's a part where Pike, who has more experience as a crewman or a Starfleet officer than anyone on the Discovery, but he doesn't have that experience on the Discovery like other crews do. So he comes in and he tries like solving something the same way he usually does, and they just flat out tell him he's wrong, and he needs to figure out how things work around here. And this is also how they deal with aliens and the other thing. And I get that this is before Kirk and this is before the next gen really put emphasis on like the prime directive.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but like you're setting the mentality backwards. I get like it takes place before that, but the mentality of still of negotiating and working things out as opposed to just telling the other species that they're wrong, they need to get in line, is something that just usually is not Star Trek. And I can see that that's also where
Yeah.
um, things fall off here.
Because even in the original series, that was always the spirit of what was going on. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because even if this takes place technically before that by a little bit, I
Yeah.
mean, I would think they didn't just come to the realization that we should treat aliens as we want to be treated,
No.
or
Mm-hmm.
treat aliens the way they want to be treated, right?
Yeah.
The quote unquote platinum rule.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it does seem kind of odd. And once again, I haven't watched the new stuff here, so I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking your word for this, Joe. I'm trusting you. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
but that seems really odd to me. It really does,
It does.
because then it takes
Mm-hmm.
away that interest in showing how,
Mm-hmm.
humanity isn't unique to humans, right?
Yeah.
Like it's something that the entire galaxy kind of
Mm-hmm.
recognizes and understands, unless you're a Cardassian. And and
Mm-hmm.
and and that's kind of sad to hear that, that, I mean, and I understand that
Mm-hmm.
properties want to update, they want to,
Yeah.
maybe take on more of the issues of the
Mm-hmm.
modern day, and that's fine. People
Yeah.
want to interpret what they want to do. You want to write your
Mm-hmm.
show the way you want, fine, whatever. But this seems definitely against the spirit of the last 50 years of media.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think that's where a lot of like the larger earlier Trek fans, they really get that divide. And even me, initially I was torn. One of the things that tore me is that like when it comes to like this show, like it is visually gorgeous. Like the amount of money they're pouring into the sets, into the CGI, and the uniforms, everything. Like they're doing a spectacular job on that. And I even want to say like the actors and actresses, like they're doing a good job. Like I don't, they're doing a good job selling their characters. It just sucks that I don't like the characters that they're selling. And I think that's what hurts it. And that's where I think also the problem lies is with when it comes to the writing. And we have now the creative head of this is I think Kurtzman. And Kurtzman
Yeah.
has worked with like J.J. Abrams on the 2009 reboot movie series. He's worked with Abrams on lots of other properties. And in an interview that Kurtzman had, he talked about remember watching the old Star Trek and saying that it wasn't memorable to him is because it was boring. And he just remembered like, okay, there are a lot of furry things here. There's a green lady over there, but that's all I'm taking away from this. So this is a writer who doesn't share the same like vision of how things got solved from Roddenberry and from Berman. For as much flack as Trek fans like to give Berman and Braga,
Mm.
um, they at least had the idea that what they were trying to do was still upholding what Gene Roddenberry wanted. And Berman actually also famously said that in his office he had a bust of Gene Roddenberry, and whenever a script would go in a way that he didn't think Gene Roddenberry would want, he would put a blindfold over the bust, and then they would keep talking about it. That was kind of fun. But for as much flack as they got, like they tried keeping this original idea of it alive, and now we have creative control to someone who wants more of like the Star Wars style of science fiction with lots of flash and panache and plot driven story as opposed to character driven story. Um, I also have to say the science fiction's lame. The instantaneous spore drive, stupidest thing ever.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Spore drive.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, how like warp is a nice feasible way, or like a mostly like kind of fun feasible way where you actually have scientists who are working towards the plausibility of it. Um, the spore drive is based off of a biological thing where basically you have mycelium, which are buildup of hyphae in fungus, and they more or less form these super highways along like tree roots and in the ground. And they're superhighways for bacteria because bacteria need moisture to be able to travel well. So they struggle when moving through the dirt and through areas where there's no water. But then they hit these damp mycelium networks, and they could basically like travel at insane bacteria speeds along the network of mycelium. It's also where they go to reproduce quite a bit. So it's like this weird fast transport online dating service for bacteria. But anyway, they can move across it really fast. Um, so basically, the show takes the idea like, why don't we take that and turn it into a new way of transporting the ships? So the Discovery initially is using more or less a giant tardigrade. Again, also bad sci-fi that tardigrades could travel through vacuums really fast for some reason.
Well,
Was basically
tardigrades,
it's
they are adorable though.
adorable and nigh indestructible.
Yeah.
Pretty great. But basically, the idea is that this tardigrade's DNA acted as kind of like a GPS for this mycelial network, and that when it turned on, you could instantaneously jump from where you currently are to somewhere else along this giant invisible space fungus network. And that's how the ship can travel instantaneously.
Honestly, I think you've told me all I need to know about
Yeah.
Discovery at
Yep.
this point.
So I guess like to try and like bring things to a wrap here, we're looking at what makes a Trek series great and what divides the fan base among things is you have to have a vision of how humanity advances in the future and how we work together to solve our problems. You have to have a crew that you can really attach to. And I would say all three generations do that. However, you're dealing with people who are from three different generations. So when you go from generation to generation, you're going to have people who don't like the way the new story is being told. So 20 years after the original series comes in, you've got this new cast who handles things differently and does things differently, and you're replacing original characters. You get people upset. And then, what? From 86, that's 30 years ago. It's like,
Yeah.
30 years ago since the Next Generation premiered. You have a new cast, a new way of telling a story that's trying to do the same thing, but in a new storytelling manner that has fans like me in my business, in my age group, not enjoying it as much because it's telling this, it's trying to tell something similar, but in a different way, and it just doesn't work for my generation as it did, as my generation's storytelling didn't work for the others. So as far as what makes one Trek good or bad or the other, I think it's kind of on the fans.
It could be. I mean, keep in mind, I'm one of those people that I don't consider myself a Trekkie. Based on the amount of times I've stumbled over my words in just this episode, you can probably tell that I don't know nearly as much as Joe does here. But what I have done is been exposed to the original series, the movies here, obviously Next Generation that we talked about, and some of the extended properties. So, you know, I definitely think there's a lot of good things that you can draw from in this series, you know, from the original two generations. Yeah, I'm not going to tell people not to watch, you know, Discovery or
no, I wouldn't do that either. No, I wouldn't do it either.
But I mean, just based off of the stuff that I've experienced from the original properties, I would even just tell people there's no harm in starting there.
No,
Seriously.
not at all. No, I wouldn't at all. Like I'd say the same thing. And also hate to make things harder for you, but even by you saying you're not a Trekkie by any means, there's even a division between people who call themselves Trekkies, and before that there were the Trekkers, and that's a whole thing all in itself. And definitely there's not enough time in this episode since we've taken a good deal of your day already. But my advice is that, like, if you haven't tried Star Trek yet, and maybe you are looking for something different, if you are a Star Wars fan, if you're more fan of like the space opera or the space drama in space, and you're looking for something a little different, give Star Trek a go. If you were afraid to do so in the past, and as far as where you want to start, I don't know, pick a series and go for it. I think there's enough similarities and differences among all of the series where you will find a series you can attach to here. There's enough over the 55-year span of this franchise where if you want to start with Discovery, go with Discovery. Like, again, like I was brought in by the visuals alone, had me going. So while I may have decided to be done with the series, like that's no reason for anyone not to start. I know plenty of people absolutely love it and they keep going with it. So yeah, I have to say it's probably time for us to leave the final frontier here.
Yeah, I'm fine with pursuing another 5-year mission elsewhere. Well, thanks everyone for joining this week's conversation about the Final Frontier. If you enjoyed this chat, why not mention this show to people who may enjoy it as well? You can find us where you find your favorite podcasts, but we're also on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter by searching for the Digital Dissection Podcast or at Digital Dissect 1. While you're there, why not comment, subscribe, and leave a review? This will help our show keep our lights on for at least a few more days.
Next week, we become Vengeance. We become the Knight. We become Batman in video games. Join us as we talk about how the Dark Knight's journey has evolved from an 8-bit PC side-scroller to an Unreal Engine driven open world adventure. And until next time, keep on dissecting.